when the IMF says we've recovered, what do they actually mean? Are they sure? What are the conditions left for Ghana to get the next tranche of $600 million US? There were other issues around the effect of the IMF program on poor people. Between September last year and June this year, electricity tariffs had gone up by 100%. How pro-poor are these IMF policies? Stephane Roudet is an economist. He led the mission team to review Ghana's performance. I sat down with him in his office to cross some T's and dot some I's. Stephane, thanks for joining us. Good morning.
Good morning. My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Good. So it's like you visit once a year or once every 6 months. What's your Ghana itinerary like?
So we are under a program that is built on the assumption that we'll have 6 monthly reviews, and so we come here to Accra to engage with the authorities formally every 6 months. Mm-hmm. So the program, you mentioned it, was approved in May, and so we're here for the first review of the program.
My first interview with you was around a year ago, I think September, October, when you had finished the initial assessment. And then you said it looked like the staff would say yes for the money, but it was until May that we heard the board say yes. Is that the usual timeline for this review as well? Now that you've done your second review, when do we have to wait to hear from the board?
So you're right to say that, first of all, what we have reached this week is a staff level agreement. So it's an agreement between the staff team that is here in the country and the government and the central bank and the authorities in general. The next step is to go to our board and for the completion of the review and the release of the funds. So this time around we talk about another $600 million tranche. You remember that what we needed at the time of the staff level agreement last time to be able to present that program to our board, what we called financing assurances. And there were lots of questions about what does that mean, financing assurances. At the time, it meant that we needed a general commitment from Ghana's official bilateral creditors that they would provide Ghana with debt relief that is consistent with the program financing parameters, the financing envelope. So this time around, once again, we will need financing assurances to be able to bring that first review to our executive board. But this time, because we are somewhat, there has been some progress in the discussions, the nature of the assurances is a little bit different. We need now an agreement between Ghana and between Ghana and its official bilateral creditors on the terms of that debt relief.
So I see three words. I see assurance, I see commitment, and then I see, if you want, agreement. So it's like three levels of seriousness. So maybe the general term is an assurance that will do it, but the devil is in the detail of the agreement. Is that how we should see this?
Yes, we still need an assurance. We always need that assurance. But at this level, the question is, what is the nature of this assurance? So the assurance last time was a general commitment on the part of creditors, and now we are moving the process along. And the nature of the assurances we need now is the agreement on the terms of the debt restructuring.
And in terms of which creditor we're talking about, in the first time you came, generally there was work around the domestic creditors and then the bilateral creditors. Will these commitments you are asking for include, say, Eurobond creditors? Or this is just general Paris Club creditors?
So we have three buckets of creditors in the authorities' debt restructuring strategy. You mentioned the domestic creditors and the domestic debt. That part has already been done. Lots of efforts have been done along the year, starting in December last year, but the domestic debt restructuring was completed over the summer. So that part is done. Then we are left with external debt, and within the external debt we have the external commercial debt, essentially the bondholders, and the official bilateral debt. So what I was talking about in terms of assurances was very much related to the official bilateral creditors. For the external commercial creditors, what we need for us to be able to present that first review to the board is good faith efforts on the part of the government to engage with its external commercial creditors with a view to achieve that relief that is consistent with the program. And as far as we know, these good faith efforts are in place.
It seems as if from an outside view, you are dealing with the easier ones first. Domestic is always easier. Official, bilateral probably the second easiest. Historically, we know that commercial debt is the most difficult. So it seems as if you're dealing with the low-hanging fruit first, and then the more difficult ones, hopefully, you will deal with them later. Is that how I should see this?
Well, it's really for the authorities to determine how they are handling their relationship with the creditors. Quite frankly, the three parallel were run in the three processes were run in parallel. It so happens that the domestic debt component has been completed, and the rest continues. But I think that's the way to look at it.
Generally in Ghana, when staff says something, the board tends to agree. So even though we are not saying the board is a rubber stamp of what the staff would say, is there a likelihood or is there a scenario in which the board will say, no, staff has done their job, but we're not happy with A or B, and therefore, because we haven't seen this kind of work, we're not going to agree to release the next tranche?
Look, frankly, I think what is really important to keep in mind is that our assessment at the current juncture is very positive. And so this is what we'll be conveying to our executive board when we present the report and the proposal to complete the review. The assessment at the current juncture is that the authorities are respecting their commitments, and this is true of both the engagement that they have taken in terms of respecting certain quantitative targets, but also implementing a number of reforms. We have a number of structural benchmarks in the program that on which the performance overall has been very strong.
What is the basis of the positive assessment for the country? What parameters do you use to say we think the country is doing well?
So on the review itself, we are looking, we do a backward-looking assessment of what has been the performance with respect to the targets so far and the commitments on the structural front. And then we also engage in discussions on the policies going forward. This is also something that is important for a review, finding agreement on what steps are going to take in the future to implement the program, and importantly, to achieve the objectives of the program. And then what we do in a review mission like that is that we also assess economic developments, just to make sure that they are consistent with what we have in mind. And I have to say that what we are seeing at the current juncture is really an emergence of signs that economic stabilization, is happening. Now, more work is needed. We want to see further progress, and all Ghanaians want to see further progress. But what we are seeing so far is very encouraging. That's the message that we have been giving. And in particular, if you look at broad macroeconomic aggregates, inflation is coming down. We're coming from 54%, I believe, in December to 40% in August. The fiscal position is improving, the external position is improving, leading to an accumulation in international reserves by the Central Bank of Ghana. Even economic activity, I have to say, has surprised us on the upside. You will remember that in the program we were projecting economic growth of 1.5% for this year. And now we have the outcome for the first half of the year, and we are above 3%. And so you can see there that there are some signs that are very encouraging.
So generally, the economic growth figures depend on who you ask. There was a report the World Bank released recently where they said Ghana's economic growth is expected to decelerate to 1.5% this year. This was a projection they released, and the slowdown was a drop from the 3.1% growth for last year. So at least from that World Bank's Africa Pulse report, it seemed they were a bit less optimistic about our growth prospects. So is it that the IMF's own projections were less optimistic initially, for which reason what you've seen now is encouraging for you?
Yeah, that's exactly it. We were also assessing that growth would be of the order of 1.5% for this year. What we're seeing now is above that, so we will have to revise our growth projection up in the context of this review. And this is of course very good news, because it means that in spite of the challenges that the Ghanaian economy has faced, the high inflation, the loss of market access for the government, and in spite of that, the economy is resilient, and growth is still around 3% at the current juncture. So very, very good news indeed.
But does it matter where the growth is coming from, or at this stage, growth is growth? Because I heard people ask, for example, that if you had growth from industrial or even agric, because they employ more people, that's a better outlook. But growth from services, even though service is great, they feel like that's not the type of growth that you really want to see. At this level, does it matter where the growth is coming from, or you're just interested in the figure?
Well, we'd love to see broad-based growth, and we're confident that at some point this is what is going to happen. But I think the Ghanaians should take pride in having good performance in the services sector. Traditionally, services are very important for job creation. Seeing a strong performance on that front is very good news.
Inflation as well, you did indicate that 54 coming down to 40 is great, but 40 is still very high. The challenge is, whilst you need to let people know we've made progress, there's a view also that if we sell a premature message of recovery, people will get complacent. I'll give you an example. 68% of the population, food accounts for half of their expenditure. Food inflation is still 51.9%. So that's a very serious situation. So I understand what you're saying with inflation, that it's come down from 54, but how do you balance that progress with the reality that a general inflation of 40% and a food inflation of 51.9 is still very, very high?
We have to acknowledge, and I believe the authorities acknowledge the reality. The Central Bank of Ghana is not comfortable with an inflation rate as 40%. This is why the bank has tightened its monetary policy stance, precisely to bring inflation down. But our point is that this is working. Those policies are working, and we are on track to see even lower inflation rates going forward. And this is a source of hope. But of course, more needs to be done. And the situation, a difficult situation like the one Ghana was facing last year, cannot be turned around just instantly. It takes time. That calls for patience. That calls for perseverance on the policy front. And this is what we are seeing.
This is great. I'm not trying to have an economic debate with you, but there's a strong view among some economists in Ghana that the central bank's inflation targeting doesn't really work, partly because they feel some of the inflation is supply side, is cost issues and not monetary issues. So the constant adjustment of the policy rate is not really the solution to inflation. So that there has to be other things on the real sector that brings inflation down. So I just don't want your comment generally on that, because there's a view that indeed the central bank adjusting the rate actually crowds out important credit to private sector. So maybe they need to take a second look at their inflation targeting policy. Is this something within the remit of the review to look at and to comment on in the short to medium term?
No, the program has been designed based on the monetary policy framework that the Bank of Ghana is using, which is indeed an inflation targeting regime, and we have been very comfortable with that regime. And quite frankly, bringing inflation down is not just about monetary policy. It's the total package of the policies that are being implemented within the context of the program that matters. The fiscal consolidation effort is very important in this respect. Monetary policy and the tight monetary policy is very important. And I think we are getting comfort from the fact that we are seeing in the numbers that this is working. All right, we have a 15 percentage points reduction in the inflation rate since the beginning of the year. So it is working. It's going in the right direction.
Your press conference was addressed by the Minister of Finance and the Governor. Are you concerned about the pressure the governor is facing around the losses that the central bank had to take from its lendings to the government? I know those questions didn't come up at the press conference, but if you follow the news in Ghana, there was a demonstration last week about that. Some are calling for the governor's head. For a program like this, you work with the fiscal and the monetary authorities. For the monetary authorities to be under severe pressure from civil society and the opposition, how does that affect the delivery of the program?
It doesn't really affect the delivery of the program. I think what we are seeing on our side when we engage with the Ghanaian authorities is excellent collaboration between the fiscal authorities, the Ministry of Finance in this case, and the Central Bank of Ghana. And Ghana facing very difficult economic and financial situations. In a context like this one, this is something that is very, very important, and we are seeing that. As far as the central bank is concerned, indeed the central bank has incurred losses in 2022, and the domestic debt restructuring has had an impact. The central bank has participated in that exercise, like other creditors, has borne its share of the debt relief burden. What gives us comfort is that we have worked with the authorities to do an analysis of the impact of these losses on the central bank, and the reduction in the net equity of the balance sheet of the central bank, we see it as likely to improve over the medium term and to be recovered over the medium term. So that gives us comfort. The other aspect that is also very important is that our assessment is that these losses are not going to have any impact on the central bank's ability to conduct monetary policy. So it does not endanger the objectives that we have under the program to continue to reduce inflation going forward and gradually to go towards 8%, the central bank's target for inflation.
But does it not undermine their moral authority to supervise Ghana's commercial banks, where, for example, they are the only institution that took a principal loss under the debt restructuring? A lot of people had longer tenors and shorter or smaller interest. 60 billion is a lot of money. So if the Banking Supervision Department now, of course, the financial sector is part of the program. It has to be stable. Banks have to recapitalize. If the institution overseeing them had to take a principal haircut, that would lead to 60 billion cedis in losses. That certainly undermines its moral authority, does it not?
Well, the short answer is no from our assessment. We don't really see the link between the two. And what we are seeing also is a very good job being done by the Central Bank of Ghana in trying to preserve financial stability in the system. You know that this is a key focus of the program, financial stability, and the commitments in this respect have been put in place, and we are very comfortable with policies by the regulator in this.
But when you look in the program, we notice there's an indication of zero financing. There are agreements. In fact, indeed, if you look into the conditions for the program, the fund is concerned about the financing of government budget by the central bank, which is why you've put certain things in the quarterly assessments around agreements with the central bank and the Ministry of Finance to reduce that. So can you just clarify that while on one side you're saying the losses don't undermine the bank's ability to do its job, in the program you are saying that you want the two to agree that they would not essentially print money to finance government's wild expenditure. So just align those two tensions for me.
First of all, I would say it's not that the fund is concerned or that the fund wants this or that. It's really, we are in a situation where the IMF is just supporting the program that the authorities are putting in place. And so jointly, the Ministry of Finance and the Central Bank of Ghana have come to the conclusion that providing monetary financing for the financing of the deficit is not the best thing to do, that this would not be compatible with bringing inflation down going forward. And there is absolute agreement between these two Ghanaian authorities that they should not be done going forward, and our position is that we very much support that agreement between Bank of Ghana and the Ministry of Finance.
This is a point of view. We're talking to Stephane Roudet, who's the leader of the staff team from the IMF. They usually come to town to do the assessment. They provide a recommendation to the board, who then will decide based on certain benchmarks being met whether to advance the next tranche. It's a $3 billion program. We've had $600 million already. We want another 600 million. Mr. Roudet, the good news says he's going to give a positive assessment of Ghana. Just trying to align some ideas to be sure we are all on the same page. Stay with us, we'll be right back.
whatever the occasion, with ATL, you can never be out of style. ATL, bringing fabric to life.
Just close the doors, and you're in a world of your own. Travel is not just about the destination, it's also about how you get there. Fly Emirates, fly better.
Finally, anyone can become a house owner.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. You Go Flip, a real estate gaming platform that allows you to play and stand a chance of winning a house or cash or consolidated value, such as savings towards a house. Simple and easy to play. Visit www.yougoflip.com. Buy a ticket to enter the game. Wait for the end of the game to enjoy the win. Anyone can win. Flip it or own it. You Go Flip. This advertisement has been vetted and approved by the Gaming Commission of Ghana. Play responsibly, not for persons below 18 years, and gaming can be addictive.
Welcome back to The Point of View. We're having a special show with Stephane Roudet, who's the leader of the staff team that's been in Ghana assessing our performance. Indeed, he was in Ghana a year ago for the initial assessment that recommended that Ghana should be given a $3 billion. The board agreed with him May this year. Now he's come back to do a review, and he says he will give a positive review to the board. And of course, the Minister of Finance and the Governor are happy with this. We're trying to understand some aspects of the review and what the future holds. One of the biggest issues with IMF programs in Ghana is what people consider its effect on the poor. So for example, if you look at the attempts to raise revenue, there's been a quarterly adjustment of utility tariffs, which has resulted, if you compare last year to now, to a 100% increase in tariffs. The view is that our tariff structure doesn't really differentiate between the rich and the poor in a meaningful way. So whilst you're ironing out broad numbers, tariffs for water and power have gone up significantly in a year, and that is not pro-poor. How do you respond to that in terms of the effect of the program on poor people?
Well, thank you for this question, because this is something that is very important to us, making sure that the program, the cost of the adjustment policies under the program are not borne by those who cannot afford them, that they are not borne by the most vulnerable in the society. And so we did spend a lot of time at the, when we negotiated the program with the authorities, but also during this review to discuss what is the appropriate stance on that front, what are the appropriate social interventions that would allow the program to be borne by those who can afford it the most. And you will remember that in designing the program, we had established a floor on social spending. So the idea behind the floor is to have a minimum amount of funds that is dedicated to those social programs that are the most effective. And that amount is going to increase throughout the program, just to make sure that allocations towards the most vulnerable help them cope with some of the aspects of the policy making that could be detrimental to them. And even, in a higher inflationary environment, it's also important that these transfers be adjusted and the benefits cover really the needs. So to be able to do that and to underpin an increase in the social, the amount dedicated to the social programs, we also have discussed policies that to accompany that effort. You will remember that in the 2023 budget, there was a significant increase in the level of benefits for the LEAP program. Now, we consider this program as a very effective one, and so we discussed with the authorities how to make sure that we reserve, in the context of the budget, the resources necessary to increase the level of benefits. We had also agreed, and this was indeed a structural benchmark for end September, that the authorities would put in place a framework that would index the benefits under the LEAP to inflation, to make sure that not only the benefit was increased in 2023, but the level of benefits would continue to increase with inflation, so that the real value of those benefits would keep up with the increase in prices. So all of that, we have spent a lot of time discussing these policies with the authorities. I believe there's strong consensus really between us and between the authorities that this is something that is very important, and perhaps something that is different from previous approaches under IMF programs.
When Ghanaians hear that you've given us $600 million and they are hoping for the board to approve another $600 million, they would say, wow, that means poor people will benefit. But it's not as simple as this, because this is budget support. So just clarify, when you advance an amount to the government, is there an attached specific memorandum of what the money should be used for in details, or is this more general to support your reserve position, to just balance your deficit position? So just how does this work?
So there is no earmarking of those funds. So they are not dedicated to funding special programs. The role of the financial support that is provided by the IMF in the context of this program is, one, to bolster the international reserve position, to help Bank of Ghana to increase this level of reserves, which in turn is important for strengthening confidence, being able to fund necessary imports, other balance of payment needs. Second, it is important to provide budget support to the government. And by budget support, it's a general budget support, and it's support to the funding of the government's deficit. So irrespective of how this is being used, what it does is that it helps finance the government's budget deficit.
When the original announcement for the program was made last year, and then when the board approved, the two specific sectors that got mentioned were the energy sector and the cocoa sector. Apart from those sectors, everything else was very broad. There's been some concern that the energy sector challenges persist despite the program. For example, the Africa Center for Energy Policy, a respected think tank, said liquidity within the energy sector has worsened. They say the cash waterfall mechanism implemented to improve liquidity has failed to achieve its objectives in two key areas: ensuring proportional distribution of revenue and enhanced revenue collection. Did your review look at the energy sector generally? And does your assessment come anywhere close to this view that the ACEP presents, that the most important angle of revenue, the cash waterfall mechanism, doesn't seem to be working?
So we did indeed discuss energy sector policies significantly. The reason for that is that the energy sector in Ghana is very macro-critical. It has lots of ramifications for the economy as a whole. So it is a key part of the program. The approach under the program has been to bring about a lot of transparency in the sector by ensuring that the energy sector shortfall, by shortfall we mean the gap between the bills that are being collected in the electricity sector and then the costs that are being incurred by the sector. So to make sure that this gap, this shortfall, is reflected on the budget and has corresponding budget appropriations so that this liquidity situation is resolved. So that has been the approach. The other part of the program is to take actions to reduce the size of the shortfall over time. So one, bringing transparency and making sure that the resources are there to cover that shortfall, and to reduce the shortfall over time. So we did discuss with the government. We will continue to discuss the situation of the sector. As far as we're concerned, we see some progress. There are still challenges. We have to acknowledge that there are significant challenges, but we see that there is some progress.
Finally, on the energy sector, the independent power producers, who are a very key part of the power mix in Ghana, have not yet agreed to take part in the debt exchange. Some of these are local, but a lot of them are foreign companies. How concerning is that to the progress of the program if the independent power producers, the IPPs, do not agree to a debt treatment?
Look, it's really very much for these IPPs and for the government to discuss and to find an agreement that is reasonable and that will work. The key challenge, I believe, in the short term is going to be having sufficient liquidity in the program, sufficient cash flow for the government to be able to stop accumulating arrears. This is really the immediate priority.
The second leg is the cocoa sector, which again, there's been an increase in the producer price that the government is offering, but we are told that this year's harvest may not be the best because the rains have not been great, and there's a fear that the syndicated loan may not be as much as originally anticipated. Again, did you review that sector in your work, and what is your outlook for the sector in view of the developments I've just discussed?
So we are not specialists of the cocoa sector, but of course it is again a very critical sector. We did engage with the authorities on the policies in the sector, and the angle for us in the program is just to try to make sure that the finances of Cocoa Board, the key entity that helps manage that sector, that its finances are sustainable. So any efforts to put Cocoa Board's finances on a sustainable path, this is what we are discussing. So you referred to the producer price that was announced this year. It's a high price compared to what we have seen in the past. The goal is really, of course, to tackle the challenges related to smuggling, but it happens at a time when we have also very high international prices, so that gives us comfort that this is something that could work. The goal really of our discussions is to ensure that the price setting mechanism for producers going forward is set in strikes the right balance between providing sufficiently high prices to farmers, given the needs on their side, but also not too high as to create financial difficulties for Cocoa Board and for the government.
Finally, this was something that came up in your quarterly financial report for July ending. It puts Ghana as the highest indebted country under the trust. It's called the Poverty Reduction and Growth Trust. People didn't know what to make of that. Is it a good thing for a country to be getting a lot more money from the IMF? Because indeed, we compared Ghana's economy to Egypt's economy, and we are getting 3 billion. They're getting the same. They are a much bigger economy. So in a sense, if IMF lends you more money, that could be positive in the sense that they believe that you can pay back. But it also could be negative in the sense that you are now the country you are the highest borrower in your category to the IMF, which is not a good thing to be a debtor. So I'm just not sure. What should we make of that report? Because it gained a bit of traction in Ghana, where they said Ghana's debt with IMF was the highest borrower in our category. Second was, I think, Kenya, and then I think DRC, and a few other countries. What should we make of that?
So let me say, first of all, I think that it's important for your viewers to understand that there are various sources of funding at the fund. There are different accounts from which countries can draw to get funding. So looking only at the PRGT and the Poverty and Reduction Trust, not at the rest, is a little bit misleading. But when it comes to exposure of that trust to Ghana, it's true that it will be the largest at the current juncture. I believe it's good news for Ghana, because it means that all of this $3 billion funding in the context of this program are coming from a source of funding that is on concessional terms. So that, the advantage of the PRGT and that all of this funding coming from the PRGT is that it allows Ghana to borrow from the IMF on concessional terms, so at a lower interest rate than what it would from other facilities, and also with maturities that are longer. So it's very beneficial from that point of view to Ghana.
Let's end with timelines. We are in October. Based on the program, when should we expect to hear from the board? And if all goes well, when is your next review due?
So the managing director of the IMF was quoted yesterday or the day before saying we would hope for a board meeting during the month of November. So we are working very hard to achieve that. Working very hard to achieve that means also engaging closely with the official bilateral creditors to make sure that the process of obtaining these financing assurances is expedited.
And if that happens, your next review would be in June? Or
so
how does that work?
So the next review will be based on as a performance as of end December.
Okay.
And so we can expect a mission probably at the end of March, or if you look at the timeline for the current review, this would be something along those lines.
March.
With a board meeting probably in June.
So Q1 2024 and then Q2 board meeting, very close to the election. Thank you, Stephane. It's been good talking to you. We really appreciate your work and your time. Stephane Roudet is the head of the mission team that is working on this program. Some say it's the 17th or the 18th, whichever it is. He's been here since last year. He's come back. Hopefully he'll come again in March. And hopefully there's good news for the country. Thank you for talking to us. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time. Stay with us. So those were the answers given by the technocrat from the IMF. As I said, this is just one of a two-part series, which started, of course, with highlights of the press conference. Next episode of this show, I did a sit-down with the Minister of State at the Finance Ministry, Dr. Mohamed Amin Adam, and I'll be playing that interview for you in my subsequent edition. Thanks for watching tonight's show. We'll be with you next time. Bye-bye.